Hello everyone, and thank you to Michael for the introduction. My name is David Morkunas, and I'm a classroom teacher from Bentleigh West Primary School in Melbourne. And I'm talking to you this evening about spaced interleaved and retrieval practice, which are just some ideas that you can use in your classroom to really help your students remember things for a lot longer than they would normally otherwise. So big thank you to Learning Difficulties Australia for having me. What a wonderful organisation. So I'm quite privileged and humbled to have been asked to do this webinar. Apparently a lot of people have registered, so I'm a bit terrified as well, but we'll get through it. So you can see on the first slide here my Twitter handle right below. Like most millennials, I measure my self-worth entirely by how many social media followers I have, so please do consider following me there. So just a bit of background about me. I've been teaching for just a shade less than 4 years. After I graduated from university with my teaching degree, I was very fortunate after dozens and dozens of failed applications to be snapped up by the fine people at Bentleigh West, where I've been teaching full-time ever since. I teach grade 4 at the moment. Before then, I was a financial auditor, which is even more boring than it sounds, or it was to me anyway. No offence to any of the auditors listening. Why would there be auditors listening to this? And I've had other jobs in the meantime as well, but teaching is something that I really enjoy doing. I've done a few talks on ideas sort of related to this. So I've done a few talks on daily reviews, and this presentation tonight will contain some information about daily reviews because that is the manifestation of spaced interleaved and retrieval practice. Those of you who have seen my previous talks though, this one is quite different in that it focuses a lot more on the theory than the practical side, but there will be some practical examples. So fear not, if you've seen my stuff before, this is mostly new. Alright, so just a quick session outline for you. I'm going to very briefly touch on our school philosophy. Bentley West does things a bit differently to a lot of other schools around the country. We'll talk about what spaced interleaved and retrieval practice actually is. Alright, I'll talk to you about what our daily reviews are. Again, remember, reviews are basically these three ideas in a practical sense, so that's what they manifest into. I'll walk you through the planning decisions we make in order to create these reviews, because I think that's really useful, especially for teachers who are keen to perhaps try this in their own schools. I'll give you a walkthrough of the RECITE, Recall and Apply framework, which is developed by Dr. Lorraine Hammond. So we've kind of taken that and adapted it for our own needs. So I'll give you some examples of how we use that. Some general tips and tricks if you want to start doing this sort of stuff in your own classrooms. And finally, if you're interested, I'll give you a few ideas for some books and extra resources if you want to continue your learning. So let's go ahead and start by talking about Bentleigh West for a bit. So Bentleigh West, where we're quite a notable school in Melbourne, I suppose, we went through a fairly significant change over the last 5 to 6 years, thanks to our assistant principal, Sarah Assome, and our principal, Stephen Capp, where we sort of overhauled a lot of our pedagogy, focused on explicit direct instruction, and particular emphasis on catering to students with learning difficulties, especially dyslexia. So, we operate under the assumption that schools are there to teach biologically secondary knowledge. And what I mean by that, biologically secondary knowledge is things that humans need explicit guidance in or explicit teaching in order to learn and understand. If we contrast this with biologically primary knowledge or skills, like learning to walk, for example, that's something that the vast majority of humans are innately able to do and don't need any special schools or classes or teachers. They just learn to do that as part of becoming a human. It's sort of hard-coded into our DNA. Whereas biologically secondary knowledge, we need explicit instruction in order to do. The classic example is reading. So, reading and print systems and languages, written languages, they're entirely artificial constructs, right? And as a result, the vast majority of students need help in order to learn to read. We know that there are very rare exceptions. Some people are able to teach themselves. So yeah, we operate under the assumption that schools teach biologically secondary knowledge. So we're there to teach students the things that they could not learn to do themselves. And we use a pedagogical model called explicit direct instruction for that. So just very quickly, a very quick summary of EDI is, it's teacher-led. All right, so it's none of this guide on the side stuff. It's the sage on the stage, if you wish to use that term. It's constantly checking for understanding to make sure that students are following along and are on the right track. The primary ways we do that are with miniature whiteboards and with selecting non-volunteers like pop sticks and that sort of thing. And it includes things like we activate prior knowledge, we do a skill closure, and we don't move to independent practice until we have seen 80% mastery. So in a class of 25 students, I would need to see at least 20 of them demonstrate that they understand what's happening in the lesson before we move to an independent practice. Otherwise, we would reteach. So there's quite a high bar to move on to independent practice. And EDI also includes a periodic review, which relates to Rosenshine's principles of instruction. That will form the basis for most of the second half of this talk. I'll be talking about daily review. All right, so our definition of learning at Bentleigh West, it's the transfer to long-term memory. All right, so changes in long-term memory. You can't call something learned if it's not in your long-term memory. So if a student, and then that goes to, I suppose, the difference between learning and performance. So performance, we kind of say is what the students can do on the day. Learning is, well, can they do it in 6 weeks from now? All right. To contrast that with my own school experience, in my primary school, for example, I might have learnt subtraction with renaming in grade 3, and it might be in term 1 of grade 3, but I wouldn't have touched that again, or I won't have touched that again until term 1 of grade 4. So we didn't touch it for another entire year. Now I was okay because I'm a maths dork and I love maths, and so I would do maths questions at home and things like that. So I would actually review without even knowing it was review. But a lot of the students in my classes struggled because, of course, they had forgotten everything in that year, right? So we do reviews daily. The idea is to make sure that they forget enough that it strengthens the memory, and I'll talk about that when I talk about retrieval practice, but not that they forget enough that they have to be retaught. All right, so yeah, underpins our approach towards reviews, supported by spaced, interleaved, and retrieval practice, which I'm almost ready to start telling you about. And another idea here is that we try and minimise teacher variance. So we know that teacher variance and sort of fluctuating teacher quality kind of accounts for a lot of the differences in student outcomes, and we want our teachers to be kind of as similar as possible in that they do use similar approaches, similar pedagogical constructs, so that we minimise that variance. All right, because variance leads to worse student outcomes. All right, the first big idea here, spaced practice. Now I should mention all three of these, they're quite easy to understand, I think. All right, and you'll be able to contextualize them with your own learning. So you'll be able to kind of think back to times in your own schooling and think, oh yes, this is similar to something I've done before. So spaced practice is also called spaced repetition. All right, and it's the idea of studying regularly instead of cramming. That's it. All right, but if you want a beautiful diagram, here's something I prepared earlier. Let's say you have an exam, and your exam's in a few weeks' time. All right, if you're cramming, then you're doing a big block or a big chunk of study right before the exam. Okay, it might even be, in my case, the night before. That's how I studied in high school. That's how I studied in university. All right, night before, big session, right before the exam. If we contrast that with spaced repetition or spaced practice, that is even sort of shorter blocks of study leading up to an exam. So the research says that cramming does work for exam performance. All right, so if you cram the entire day before an exam, you will generally do quite well if you understand the material. Where the negative of that is that you will start to forget that information sort of immediately after the exam. So if I was to give you a follow-up exam a week or two later, and you hadn't studied since the cramming session the night beforehand, your performance would decrease significantly. Whereas if you've done spaced repetition and then you've done the exam and I'll give you a follow-up test, you're much more likely to remember more of that information. So if all we're focused about is exam performance, then fine, cram, that's fine. But I'm a grade 4 teacher. My students don't really do exams outside of NAPLAN, and I really want them to understand as much as possible or remember as much as possible about grade 4 material before they move on to grade 5. All right, so we do spaced repetition because we don't simply want them to remember everything for an end of year exam and then immediately forget it. All right, we want them to remember everything for a longer time. So that's spaced practice. Then we have interleaved practice. Again, nothing too crazy here. It's simply the idea that you study a variety of topics, all right, in a study session, rather than blocked practice. And blocked practice is simply just studying one topic. So again, another magnificent diagram for you. And we also vary the order in which the topics are studied. So let's say that I've taken my own advice and I'm doing some spaced practice. Great job. And I'm doing some study sessions on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. If I was just doing blocked practice, then on Monday, I'm going to study topic 1, on Wednesday, topic 2, Friday, topic 3. Let's say an hour each, right? So blocked practice. We're putting one topic in every time we study. If I was to interleave that, then what I would do, instead of doing an hour of each, I would do perhaps 20 minutes on topic 1, 20 minutes on topic 2, 20 minutes on topic 3. And then on Wednesday, the same thing, but change the order around. And then on Friday, same deal, but change the order around again. All right. So interleaving has similar benefits to spaced practice. Okay, in that we see the benefits not necessarily on the day of a test or an exam, but in the subsequent weeks and months. All right, it's shown to help students retain information for longer than if you simply do blocked practice. Remember, the longer they can remember it, the better it is. And then finally, retrieval practice, probably the most important of the three, I would say. And this is simply the art of bringing information back from long-term into working memory. Okay. So forcing students to think about something that they've committed to long-term memory, putting it in their working memory for them to manipulate and use. So retrieval after a delay makes memory stronger and more flexible. So right at the point that we're starting to forget things, if we then retrieve these memories back into our working memory, it makes them stronger and more flexible. And it means that we can then increase the gap before we have to retrieve it again. So this is something that you may have seen before. All right, it's quite popular. Ebbinghausen's forgetting curve. All right, the x-axis is a time scale. So this example tells us days, and the y-axis is telling us the percentage of information that we're retaining. So our retention rate, essentially. So right here in the top left, this is the point at which we would teach a lesson. All right, and during the lesson, the students remember 100% of everything. But you can see that immediately following the lesson, we get a sharp decrease in the amount of knowledge. And after a day, they've forgotten perhaps 20%. If we then review that material after a day, then they will go back up to remembering all of it. And we can see what's happening to the gradient of this curve here. It's smoothing out. It's not becoming quite as steep. So then we only have to review, instead of after a day, after 2 more days and after 3 more days. So we can make those gaps longer because the rate at which we forget information slows down. That's the idea or the power behind retrieval practice. When we retrieve it from long-term memory after a delay, we make it stronger, durable, and more likely to last longer. So retrieval practice can take many forms, all right? We at Bentleigh West have chosen to do daily reviews. I'll explain what those are if you haven't seen my previous talks. But so daily reviews work really well I think in a primary school setting, but you may not necessarily want to use them in high school, especially upper high school and VCE. Some other examples I've seen are sort of low-stake quizzes where you might hand out multiple choice papers at the start of a lesson. I've seen diagrams, especially in physics and biology, like diagrams that have the labels missing, so the students have to fill in the correct parts. And even something as simple as, if you're a history teacher, all right, write down everything you can about Normandy. I'll give you 2 minutes. And simply just students writing facts on a piece of paper. The retrieval is just the act of grabbing memories out of long-term memory and into your working memory. All right, that's all it is. So it can take lots of forms. But as I said, we've chosen daily reviews. That will be what I focus on. So they're the 3 ideas: spaced, interleaved, and retrieval practice. All right, I want you to keep those in mind as I go through our review stuff, because it hopefully should become quite evident as to how we use those ideas in our reviews. So I've mentioned it like 4 times. Let's hurry up and get on with it. What are daily reviews, right? They're PowerPoint presentations. That's it. They're PowerPoints, but they're built on stuff that we've already taught. All right, so previously taught material. So the timeline goes that a teacher would teach a lesson, then we take those slides, put them into review, and then we start reviewing stuff. So they're very short. They're shorter than a lesson. All right, and they're done regularly. So we review in maths and English every day for about 20 to 30 minutes. Our lessons tend to be 45 minutes. So short regular sessions, that's that spaced practice. We're not saying, all right, we're going to do a 2-hour chunk of maths on a Friday. We're saying, no, 20 or 30 minutes every day. So we're already using that spaced practice principle. So there's a wide selection of past topics in random order. So that's our interleaving. Remember, not doing blocked practice and saying, let's just do addition today. In a maths review, we might do, let's do addition, multiplication, let's do 24-hour time, 3D solids, independent events, angles. There are lots of things that we can do in a single maths review. Our maths reviews generally cover between 10 and 12 topics in about 25 to 30 minutes. So very quick, but interleaving, and we change the order of them regularly as well. So that's that interleaved practice. And then we take things out and put them back in. All right, take topics out of the review for a week or two, put them back in. That's that retrieval practice. So we're giving students enough time to forget slightly and then bringing it back in order to strengthen those memories. So that's retrieval practice. All right, so some features of daily reviews. Okay, these will be familiar if you've seen my other stuff. We do very short explanations, much quicker than lessons. All right, in a lesson we might be able to spend 5 or 10 minutes on a skill or concept development, but we have no time in the reviews, so very, very short recaps. I'll show you examples. Embedded differentiation, which I'll talk about a bit with some examples. So in a slide, especially in slides where students are expected to apply their own knowledge and actually do some work on their whiteboards, we differentiate within the slide itself. So if we've got lots of information, some students might do like this much, some students might do all of it. All right, so we embed differentiation within. And quick pace. Okay, anyone who's ever visited our school, anyone who's ever seen videos of us doing reviews, they're extremely quick. All right, and obviously they're not when you start out, you work up to the pace, but they are really, really quick, and the students are generally very good at keeping up with us. So this is how we plan for these, I suppose. So it begins with the lesson itself. So teachers will plan and create and teach a lesson with EDI, and then from there, the slides are taken out of the lesson because we generally do our lessons in PowerPoint, and they're adapted for the review. So they go from the lesson, we take the slides that we need out and put them into our review decks. And then that skill or concept from the lesson has become part of the daily reviews. So let's say on a particular week, I've taught subtraction across zeros. All right, so I've taught the lesson, then I would take those slides, put them into review, and they become part of the review deck. So then for the next few days, we will do some subtraction across zero practice. So as I said before, slides are taken in and out regularly. So after a few exposures, we'll take those slides out, put them back in after a particular length of time. So that relates back to the forgetting curve and back to that retrieval practice idea. So here's an example of a spreadsheet that we use, or some of our teams at our school use, in order to keep track of what needs to be in the review for a particular day. Now this is quite an extreme example. I really like this, and it's actually a lot easier to use than it might appear to be at first thought. But it was created by an actuary. All right, it was created by the relative of one of our teachers. I'm pretty good with Excel. I have no idea how I would make this. So don't be thinking that you need to become like some kind of magic Excel wizard in order to do something like this. It is important if you decide, though, to do reviews, just to keep track of what is in and what is out of the review and how long things have been out for. The gap doesn't matter too much. All right, but just having a gap does. So just to walk you through it very quickly, take this row, for example. These are our tasks that we've done in maths. So I've done vertical addition, no renaming. I've taught it, that's the red one. I've taught it on the Monday. Then I've put it in review for the next 4 days. They're the yellow ones. And then after a few weeks, I'll put it back into review, which are the green rectangles there. So it's just in order for me to understand what to put in and what to put out. At this point, because we've been doing reviews a while, they're really large. For my maths review, for example, it's about 1,600 slides. And because of that, trying to keep it in track up here of what goes in and what goes out is just quite unwieldy. So use something like that if you like, but you don't have to do it to this level. All right, we do it because, we like to be really well organized. Okay, I'm going to talk to you about a different framework now, but I want you to keep spaced, interleaved, and retrieval practice in mind. This is called RECITE, Recall, Apply, and as I said before, it comes from Dr. Lorraine Hammond and her explicit instruction materials. So, this is basically like 3 stages of our slides for a given topic. So the RECITE stage, students simply recite information. So they'll read it with the whole class off a slide. Then we have the recall slide, or the recall stage, sorry, and that's when students remember the information that they've just recited, and then they respond to something, normally orally. And that can be whole class, or it can be non-volunteers with pop sticks. Then we have the apply stage. So students use the information in order to answer some independent questions. All right, so they're taking the knowledge that they've just recited and recalled, and they're actually using it themselves, and that's generally a writing stage on their whiteboards. All right, so here's an example. This slide has come straight from our grade 4 maths review. So it's just simply the multiplication facts for the 5s. So at the recite stage, we're just going to recite them. So I would say to my students, all right, let's read the 5s forwards and backwards with me, and we'll all say together, 1 5 is 5, 2 5s are 10, 3 5s are 15, 4 5s are 20. So we'll do that forwards and backwards. Recite. That's all it is. Then the recall stage, we leave the information up there, but then I'm going to ask them for some random multiplication facts. So I might do this with whole class responses, or I might pick pop sticks. So I'll say to them, all right, 8 5s, and the class will say 40. 2 5s, 10. 5 5s, the class will say 25. And you can make this harder as well. We like to do like 7 5s, 35, 75s, 350. So they're recalling information about multiplying powers of 10. You can also use the pop sticks, as I said. So I might pull a name out. Young Rudiger, what are 2 5s? And young Rudiger would say 10. I don't know why I chose that name. All right, so that's the recite and the recall stage. And then finally we have the apply stage. So this is a different color scheme. So the white slides, listening slides, the tan colored slides means it's time to write. Okay, just a visual cue, I should say. So we have the 5s here in random order, but the answers are missing. So the job of the students, of course, is to write the answers down. So you give them a minute to do that. So they're applying the knowledge that they've just recited and recalled in order to demonstrate their understanding for the teacher. This is a really wonderful time for some formative assessment as well, because this will allow you to roam the room and see who understands and who doesn't. You can also check in with students that need a bit of extra help. This is also where the embedded differentiation comes in. These top 10 questions are just simply the 5s facts. All right. In my class, by this point of the school year, I expect all my students to do at least this. All right, and I'll move on once everyone's done this. But for those students who are capable, below the line here are some harder questions that relate to the 5s as well, including a division question in disguise, right? So they're expected to do a minimum amount, and then we move on, but there is enough there for people to stay occupied. A teacher at my school, Ethan Ford, likes to talk about maximising time on task. So we want to make sure that they're on task as often as possible, because when they're not on task, that's when we start getting behavioural issues and classroom management issues. So that's the apply. So recall, recite, apply. Okay, and then we would go through the answers. We would normally read them as a class together, but we'll move on. So here's a spelling example. And I'm always terrified doing spelling examples in case I've gotten a rule wrong. If I have, because I know there are lots of spelling wizards in the audience tonight, please do reach out. I'm always happy for constructive feedback. So here's the recite stage. Again, we're just going to recite it together as a class. This slide's about the 1-1-1 rule, in case you're interested. So we would say, if a word has, and the class would read with me, 1 syllable, 1 short vowel, 1 ending consonant, and you add a suffix beginning with a vowel, you must double the final consonant. All right, so we read all that together. That's recite. Now for recall. So here are some morphographs. All right, and I'm going to ask my students these questions. They're going to answer as a whole class. 1 syllable, we're referring to run. 1 syllable, yes, they would say. 1 short vowel, yes. 1 ending consonant, yes. Suffix begins with a vowel, yes. So do we double the consonant? They would say yes. So we have running there with 2 ends, and we would spell through the word. So they're recalling what they've just recited. Then finally the apply slide. Now I have 2 apply slides here depending on how complex or how challenging I want the work to be. This one's just oral responses. So do these words and suffixes follow the 1-1-1 rule that we've just done? So spin plus ing, and I'll get them to pause for a couple of seconds and then say all right, and they would say either yes or no. So in this case, yes, because the n in spin will be doubled. Okay, and some of them will be no, like flatly. And why? Because the suffix does not begin with a vowel, that should say. So we'll go through those. So there's just some oral answers. And again, I can do whole class, or I can choose non-volunteers. But if I wanted to do something a bit more complex, all right, this time I'd like you to write it. Okay, so on their whiteboards, they're going to put flat and together, but also they need to remember the 1-1-1 rule, so they would double the T. Okay, and after a minute or so, you'd ask them to chin their work. You would check through it. Great chance for formative assessment. If the entire class is bombed, obviously they're not comfortable with the 1-1-1 rule, and you might need to put it in review for longer or even reteach. I'll just go through the rest of those. Okay, so we do something here as well with this progression where we remove some of the earlier scaffolds as we put things in for more exposures. I'll explain what that means because that didn't sound too flash. The first time we put it in review, we're going to do the recite, the recall, and the apply. We're going to do all 3. All right, and then if we put it into review again, we will probably do the same. do the recite, the recall, the apply section. As we keep putting it into review more and more often, we start to remove the earlier stages. Again, with retrieval practice, we want them to forget slightly before we expose it to them again, all right? Because that will strengthen their memories. But by removing the scaffolds as well, it also gives the teacher a great chance to assess and determine whether or not the students actually understand this, or if the only reason they're understanding it is because they've just read it 30 seconds ago. So for the third exposure, maybe we get rid of the recite slide and we just do a recall and an apply part. And then for the fourth and fifth exposures, maybe we just do the apply. All right, so instead of saying, all right, let's recite the 5 times tables, let's do some random ones. Instead, maybe we just put the slide up and they work straight away. All right, so it's a great chance to see, to sort of measure their understanding that way. Okay. So now some tips and tricks for you if you want to follow, if you want to join the dark side, which is, creating a PowerPoint addiction within yourself, as I have over the last couple of years. Here are some things to keep mind of. The first thing is you want your elements to appear one at a time. So just as this slide and the rest of my slides throughout this presentation have done. The reason why is we want to minimize the chances of the students going into cognitive overload. Right? If I have 50 elements on a page and on a slide and I just go and put them all up at once, the students have no idea where to focus on. All right, the slide's too busy. All right, even if you're saying, all right, I'd like you to read this top line, you'll have students whose eyes are sort of going everywhere. So things should come one element at a time, and that way they know where to look. Don't do it. Don't do it. If you're a grade 5 or 6 teacher and you get your students to present a lot with PowerPoint, I'm sure they do this all the time. Every single letter has to have its own animation, like the bullet sound, all right, or the click sound or the chirp sound. Don't do this, all right? Here are some more examples. Let's make it fat and rotate it and turn it red. All you are doing is putting your students in a cognitive overload, or you have to wonder about where their focus is. Is their focus on the material that you try to present to them, or is their focus on, oh, look, the teacher just made the words bounce onto the page. How cool is that? So the only animations that I use in PowerPoint, I use appear, where it just appears in place. All right, I use disappear because sometimes I want elements to just vanish, and I do sometimes use the move animations. So sometimes having elements move around the page or move within sections can help demonstrate a particular concept or skill. Those of you might have seen on Twitter, I've shared my fact family slides. All right, that's an example of move where it actually helps understanding. So the notes section is really useful for teacher explanations. This is good if you've got other people in your team that will use your reviews, or if you have a CRT teaching your class. Okay, so use the notes section at the bottom of each slide, and that way, when you're teaching a review and it's on your screen, but you have your laptop in front of you, your laptop has all the notes. So you might put some stuff in notes that you don't want the students to read. It might be for teachers like, hey, make sure you pause after this point, or make sure you repeat this twice. So a useful way to make sure that everyone's teaching the same approach, minimizing that teacher variance. So text, short and sweet. All right, we don't want to be wordsmiths and craft a 200-word explanation of something when 10 words will do. Because remember, reviews have to be very quick. And your pace will improve over time. All right, the first time I tried a full-length maths review, it took me an hour. All right, now I'm at the point where I can do them in 25 to 30 minutes. Don't expect, like anything, don't expect to be perfect at it the first time. You and the students will take a while to get used to them. The luxury we have at my school now, because we do reviews from prep, by the time the students hit grade 4, they're very familiar and very comfortable with the norms and the routines that we have for reviews, so we're able to kind of go straight into it from term 1 and hit the ground running. But that will take time. And yeah, you can inject your personality into the slides. So those of you who have seen my previous presentations, I've done really silly stuff before. Like I've photoshopped my face in, put it all over the screen for a sabotaging slide. Just a few weeks ago for May 4th, for Star Wars Day, I did a bunch of Star Wars stuff for the mass review. You can do that. You just have to be careful with it. All right. Obviously, I've already spoken about not putting kids into cognitive overload, that sort of thing. Don't do any jokes or gags right before they're about to write or reply something, because then they will be thinking about how funny or unfunny you are rather than the work. So you can do it because it's a good idea to, especially in primary school, because you don't want them to be dry all the time. But be careful. Less is more with that stuff. All right. If you're skeptical, and you have every right to be, I am simply a friendly neighbourhood classroom teacher. I haven't been teaching for anywhere near as long as some of you have, I'm sure. So why on earth should you listen to me? I think it's completely healthy to be skeptical. I've got an experiment for you though. If you don't believe that spaced, interleaved, or retrieval practice would work in your classroom, try it yourself with any new learning that you have. All right, are you learning a new instrument? Are you learning a language? Try this stuff yourself. Okay, so they're my examples. So I'm learning guitar. Okay, and I did have a very failed attempt at learning Japanese a few years ago. One of the reasons I didn't learn it well is I did not space my practice out. All right, I just did blocked practice for my Japanese. So try it out. All right, if you're learning guitar, instead of doing 2 hours on a Sunday, do some 10-minute sessions. Space it out. Instead of just practicing one song, do a song in 10 minutes. Do some scales. Do some theory. Interleaved practice. All right. If you're learning a language, don't conjugate French verbs for an hour and a half. That sounds horrible, by the way. Conjugate some verbs for a bit. Do some conversational practice. Do some dictation. Interleave it, and then, if you've learned a song on guitar, for example, leave it for a couple of weeks, come back to it, do some retrieval practice and see how well you remember it. Try those ideas at home and you'd be surprised at the results. You'd be surprised. Anki, it's the Japanese word for memorize. Really useful app for this if you want to use it at home. It's pretty clunky to use in the classroom, sadly. There are examples of people using it. But on iPhones and that sort of thing can be quite expensive. But the desktop and the Android version of this app is free. And it's basically a memory flashcard app, but it has the forgetting curve built into it. So I used it for Japanese with pictographs. So I'd have a deck of pictographs. This is when I actually did practice my Japanese. A pictograph would come up on the screen. I would say what it was, and if I got it correct, it would disappear for a few days. If I got it wrong, it would appear again much quicker. All right, so you can use that app with these ideas, spaced, interleaved, and retrieval practice. Try it and see if it works. And if it works for you, why wouldn't it work in the classroom? Here are some books that I think you should have a look at. I've got literally all of them on the table right behind me. The first one, Understanding How We Learn, will do a much better job of explaining this stuff than I did tonight. It's by Jana Weinstein-Jones and Megan Sumeraki. It includes sections on spaced, interleaved, and retrieval practice, and some really, really good practical examples. Exceptional book, really good. If you want to kind of improve your design chops, then have a look at Dual Coding with Teachers, okay, which I have right here. It's kind of a little short, little short book. This one's really, really great. Okay, it's got some really awesome ideas, especially for PowerPoint, of how to declutter stuff, how to make sure that people's eyes are exactly where you want them. Okay, so have a look at that one. And then finally, Rosenshine's Principles in Action, really good. It's really, really short. As a teacher, I don't want to slog through 500 pages of guff. So this thing is tiny. I think it's less than 100 pages. It'll only take you an hour or two to read. It's a really wonderful synthesis of Rosenshine's 10 principles, of which 2 are daily and monthly reviews. Coincidentally, the guy, Oliver Caviglioli, who did this book here, has actually done the graphics for all 3. So visually, they're all beautiful books. And some other resources for you as well. So John Kenny's blog, I'm sure some of you have read it. I believe John is in the crowd tonight, so thank you for joining us, John. He's got a really terrific blog. There's the web address for it. It's by a teacher for teachers. It's not full of jargon. It's really, really accessible. He did a spaced repetition post last week that was really good. So check his work out. He's exceptional. And also, I imagine a lot of you are familiar with the Education Research Reading Room podcast by Ollie Lavelle. He's got episodes that discuss things like Rosenshine. He's got episodes with Hattie. He's got an episode with Daisy Christodoulou, who ironically presented Research at Home 2 days ago about this same stuff. So talk about stealing my thunder. But yeah, that podcast is a great resource. I believe Ollie's also involved in the in creating an app similar to Anki, so check that out as well. So in summary, very quick summary for you, all right, almost a review. Spaced practice is more effective than cramming, all right? So don't do big, giant chunks with your students, break them up into shorter sessions. Interleaved practice is more effective than blocked practice, all right? So instead of studying the same topic for a big chunk of time, change the topics up, change them rapidly, put them in random order. Retrieval practice is simply just moving from long-term to working memory. Okay, doing so strengthens our memories and makes them more durable, more flexible as well. So reviewing previous learning helps students retain information. It sounds quite obvious when you say it out loud, all right, but it really does. We feel anecdotally within my team, we feel that the reviews tend to be where the learning is observed most. All right, I talked at the start about learning and performance. We see good performance in the lessons, but when those students are then able to do it again with something that's in review that hasn't been in the review for a month, that's when you know that they've actually learnt it or they're well on their way to learning something. And there we are. That's the end of the presentation. So I will happily stick around for any questions. Just to break my own rules, I have made sure that my Twitter handle flashes different colors. Okay, don't forget, as I said at the start, my self-worth is only measured by how many Twitter followers I have. I'm dangerously close to 1,000, so who knows, you might be the lucky one to tip me over the line. And of course, you're always welcome to email me if you have any questions. But thanks for listening.